Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. I'm your host, Amelia Kruby, and on this show, I talk to amazing artists, business owners, and today, freelancers, about how we're sharing our work and making money online with radical generosity, energetic sovereignty, and no or minimal social media. If you're new to Off the Grid, welcome. We are currently in season 6 of the show, but if you're tuning in for the first time, I just want to make sure that you know about our free Leaving Social Media Toolkit. This free resource includes the 3 tools that I use to leave social media and launch a business without it. Those are a 5-step plan for leaving any social platform, my list of 100 ways to share your work without social media, and a creative marketing experiments database. To get all of that for yourself for free, just head to offthegrid.fun/toolkit or grab the link in the show notes. Today on the show, we are here to talk about something that I have never directly addressed on the podcast before, and that something is freelancing. If you are an astute listener or an Off the Grid superfan, 1, I love you, and 2, you may know already that before I started Softer Sounds or this podcast, I was a freelancer. I started freelance audio editing back in 2017. I was in grad school and needed to make more money, and I had a friend with a podcast who asked if I would edit it for her. And from there, I just kind of took on clients at random, and eventually that grew to the point where I was making about $10,000 a year from freelance audio editing work. For me, freelancing was a way to fill in the gaps in my income when the multiple jobs I was working just weren't enough to get me by. And it was also a way to build my skills and to experiment with doing a type of work that I had never done before and wasn't sure if I'd really want to do, but kind of thought I might. So I was able to try it out through freelancing. What I love about freelance work is the flexibility and autonomy that it provides. I think it's a great bridge for folks hoping to leave a full-time job and start a business. It's also a good option for people who still work part-time or full-time and want or need to make extra money. And freelancing can also be something you build into an entire business and craft a sustainable, independent career from. So today on the show, I've got a guest who is an expert freelancer and is here to talk to us all about what freelancing is, why it's so great for multi-passionate people, how to get your first freelance gig if this is something you'd like to try out, how to make this a long-term path if this is something you want to do sustainably over time, and also a bit about how the money of freelancing works and some firsthand advice of things that we have maybe done, a little bit right and also a little bit wrong over time. We will be exploring that as well. So let me introduce you to our guest and we'll dive right in. Sarah Jutra has served as a design director, startup co-founder, agency owner, product design lead, design educator, business mentor, and is now the founder of Huzzah Studio. Over her career, she has revitalized numerous brands, designed bespoke web experiences, and shipped over 20 apps to the App Store. Sarah is a pancake lover, a community builder, a weekend adventurer, and she writes the amazing newsletter Freelance for Life, and she teaches courses about this and so much more that we're going to learn about today. So, hi, Sarah. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Hi, Amelia. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such a gift to be here.
Honestly, I was really excited when you pitched me about this because freelancing is something that just has implicitly been a part of my background, but I never explicitly pull it out as a way of doing business. And I'm so excited to really dive into that with you today, especially because I think with the tumultuous nature of the time that we're in, I think of freelancing as sort of like a card I have in my back pocket that if I need to make some money or I need to try something else out, it's kind of always something I can turn to be well, maybe I'll take on some freelance work or I'll seek out some freelance work. So I want to start with the most basic question in the world that is also a kind of hard one to answer. And that question is, what is freelancing?
That's a great question. It's, has, I think, different definitions for different people. And it's a word that I actually really love and gravitate towards. So it's something that I like to use, even though I also see myself as other words like independent contractor or small business owner. So I think that we can kind of use these terms interchangeably. I think at its basic definition, sort of, earning money on a per job basis, being seen as self-employed, right, or independent, not working for a traditional employer. And most importantly, you're at liberty to work with various clients and have flexibility to take on work in different ways. So that's sort of what it represents for me. I had actually been really curious about the etymology of the word, and I think we have a fellow friend in common, Nicole Cloutier, who has a fantastic podcast about words and their meanings and origins. And I was curious about freelancing years back, and I looked it up, and I was like shocked to hear that it was attributed to Sir Walter Scott and had been described as a medieval mercenary warrior. And I thought, oh, this is so fascinating. It really breaks down to a free lance and someone who is not sworn to a lord. And that really excited me of thinking, yes, like I am my own ruler, caretaker, and it's not someone else that I am beholden to. So that's sort of a fun definition that it represents for me.
Thank you so much for bringing that in, because it is interesting to think about the origin of the word. And I appreciate the things that you pulled out around the specificity of what freelancing is. And I agree with you that it's challenging to define because there's a lot of overlap with different things, right? So I do think in terms of like a legal employment status, we can say a freelancer is not an employee. They are an independent contractor, which is how, the IRS would classify you. You're either an employee or you're an independent contractor. Freelancers are always independent contractors. But the distinction between freelancer and small business owner, it's definitely a Venn diagram, and there's a lot of overlap between these two categories. So I'm curious, you said at the beginning, like you love the term freelancer. I myself call myself a small business owner. I never call myself a freelancer anymore. So I guess I'd love to unpack that a little bit. Like, why do you like the term freelancer? And then I can talk about why I like small business owner and what we think the differences are.
I think that's great. And I also love the term small business owner because I do, I have a studio, I have an ongoing practice, and it feels, let's just say I feel like there's a commitment to that, and I feel proud of what I have built. And I think that in some areas of my client relations and my work life, I act a little bit more as a freelancer because as a small business owner, I am currently the only one full-time employed with my studio. I have other folks that I bring on as subcontractors. I have sort of a collective that I like to work with in bigger projects. But sometimes I'm working subcontracted out with an agency, or I'm coming on for a short-term project. And that we could say maybe does fit more of the traditional freelancer definition. Whereas other experiences that I have with clients, I'm bringing them on, I'm working with them over time, and they are part of my client collective at Huzzah Studio. And then I can kind of take on that small business owner title or role. I think the challenge that I see with the term freelancer is that some people look at it as transient or something that is just to fill in the time in between other things. And I do think it's a wonderful way of working. And part of my excitement over freelance in the future of work is that we can maybe redefine business as usual and think about other ways that we can collaborate with each other and work with each other in different environments. And so I'm trying to I want to almost like redefine and revive the term freelance. And maybe the part that reaches out to me most is just the term free, right, is the root of the word. And I really feel a sense of freedom with this kind of working. And maybe when we start to think about ourselves as small business owners, again, just in the traditional sense of business and how we know it, right, in our capitalist world today, it starts to create a little bit more of walls or constraints around us and maybe a little bit less of the freedom because there's more traditional ways of operating or growing or scaling. And I don't necessarily believe that we all have to do business in that way. So there's something that I just realize I'm gravitating towards with this term freelancer, of it still being a bit more fluid, or there's a bit more possibility there.
That's so interesting because I feel the opposite. And I think this comes through my background with freelancing, because when I was a freelance audio editor, I felt like I was always doing my work on other people's terms. Yes, they hired me and I was an independent contractor and like I was free to work for other people. But I just noticed like every time I brought on a new client, they wanted to like negotiate my rates. They wanted to like set exactly how I should like something should sound. Like they really didn't perceive me as much as like an authority as they did as this like person they were hiring to complete a task for them. And they would tell me when it was due and they would tell me like all these different sort of parameters around the work. And part of the reason that I started Softer Sounds and was like so insistent on like, I am no longer a freelancer, I am now a business owner, is I actually wanted to build my own systems, my own rates. Like I started with these sort of set packages. And so like, I'm like, this is what is available through the studio. You can choose to purchase it from us or not. But it's interesting, like for me, as a freelancer, I felt like I was never in the position of power. And as a business owner, I realize now like a lot of it was about that like energetic sovereignty. Like I was claiming that I was like sovereign over my work. And I think there are different steps here. And this has to do with our different journeys too, because I never had a traditional 9 to 5 job. And I think that if you're moving out of that into freelance, you're like claiming a lot of energetic sovereignty through becoming a freelancer. But for me, becoming a business owner felt like the move of like claiming that energetic and work sovereignty. So I know this plays a little bit into our backgrounds and kind of why we have these different relationships to this concept and also the types of work we do within it. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey with freelancing so listeners can kind of like fill in all of that as well?
Absolutely. Yes. And that was so well said, Amelia. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. As how we've kind of reached these terms and how we've defined them for ourselves. So, yes, I worked in full time roles in tech. I got a degree in multimedia studies and graphic design. I knew very, very early on, even when I was still in high school, that I wanted to pursue design. I had a job at age 16 working for a very tiny web hosting company in my small town in New England and was designing websites and things for the Parks and Rec and local businesses and was just really, really inspired to pursue design as a career. So when I got out of university, I started working in the design field and honestly moved from job to job, as many of us do. I think for a really long time, I thought that there was something wrong with me because I wasn't finding fulfillment in the jobs that I was taking on because I was always very clear on enjoying the work that I was doing and passionate about the work that I was doing. It felt like I was in a good fit for my profession, but I struggled a lot at different companies. And a lot of that honestly had to do with a lack of alignment in values, which I didn't know how to articulate back in the day. And often, of course, turned it on myself. What's wrong with me? I used to feel like, why can't I hack it in this world of working, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 40 hours a week? There were a lot of challenges there. Unfortunately, as many folks can probably relate to, there were some toxic work environments. I have had a long history in consumer product design within the tech industry, and tech has some challenges, startup culture, a lot of weight on people working in those roles. And I also have had years struggling with chronic migraine, and it actually was a secondary challenge, health challenge. In 2016, where I somehow contracted mononucleosis and I got really sick taking on a new role. And I just thought, wow, this system is not set up to support us and our different needs. So it was a really challenging time to think about leaving the path that I had been working so hard towards, climbing that proverbial corporate ladder. But I just was really, really unhappy. And I decided that I needed to just try something different. And so that was the catalyst for me taking the jump and the plunge. And I left my director role at the time and I decided I was going to freelance and it would just be an experiment. And it turned out to be the right path forward, and I haven't looked back since. So I've been independent now for 9 years.
What were your first freelance gigs like? Like, what did you do after you left your role? And were there any early successes or quote unquote failures that you look back on and you're like, huh, that was interesting?
Oh, yes. I was very lucky because I was struggling. So I took a director of interaction design role and I was struggling there. I was dealing with, my health issues. And I had this opportunity come my way from a relationship that I had made at South by Southwest years back when I was still working in-house for a startup. And I got this opportunity to work on a native mobile app for a childhood education and development product. And this looked to be a pretty meaty project, definitely a couple months worth of work. And I thought, well, this is it. This is something to at least take the jump with and see how it goes. It was the one thing, right, that I could work on and just test the waters. And it turned out to be a fantastic project that gave me a little bit of security. Even looking back now, a pretty lengthy project compared to other, work that I do and other project-based work that I do. So that was really successful. And then I had projects where, I struggled with interesting clients. I had one project where the two founders came to hire me, but had disagreements on what they were looking for and decided that they needed to halt the project midway because there wasn't an alignment. And they also didn't want to pay. And I didn't have protections in my contract around that. And, started to learn things the hard way with trial and error out in the world. So yeah, there's definitely some good learnings in my early years of freelancing. And I think the very first year was really just, can I even do this? I was just, like I said, experimenting. It was, can I make enough income to sustain the life that I had built when I was working for an employer? And will I even enjoy doing this? And the first year was definitely challenging, but the second year became, I really enjoy doing this and I think I can make this work. And it just year after year started to change the questions that I was asking and the focus that I had. And that's where I think some of that potential freelance into more rooted business building and systems development started to take hold. But that was several years in.
I think what's just really standing out to me is that it started with relationships. Like for you, that is somebody you had met years before at South by Southwest. For me, it was my college roommate who's also a good friend who happened to be running her own startup and like had this need. And I was like, cool, I just learned how to do this at the radio station. I'll just do it for you. And I think that obviously, on this podcast, I talk about the importance of relationship building and cultivating your network and relationship marketing all the time. But I think especially, I'm just thinking of our listeners who have a background in these like traditional employment spaces. That background is such an asset if you want to become a freelancer. Or it can be a really nice bridge if you're like, I'm trying to build this business, but it's going to be a slow path. Like being able to freelance doing the type of work you used to do, but in a more independent way. I just see that as like such an amazing way to support yourself while you're getting where you actually want to go.
I teach classes to help folks who are interested in pursuing freelance or building their businesses. And one of the questions that I often get asked, especially for folks who are new coming out of college, right, or sort of new to the working world, do I need to work in-house before I can freelance? And I used to believe, well, yes, because so much of my own lived experience has been one, learning the trade, learning skill development, both hard skills and soft skill development, and also making connections, right? Learning how to work with others, just all of those basics, and leaving working for in-house employment to going out on my own. I absolutely had the support of past colleagues, right, past bosses, and that network to understand how I work, right, and to potentially hire me. After some time, though, I started to realize my struggles with working in those environments and how long I honestly suffered before going independent. And it started to be a new question that I was asking myself, well, can people just jump automatically into this, into freelance without working full time first and not having to have those hard experiences if that's something they want to pursue? And so I started to change my tune a little bit in terms of, if folks want to pursue different ways of working, how can we support each other, right, to have that experience? And it might look different for them. Their network might be a little bit different. So, yeah, I'm trying to think more broadly about that question. But my own lived experience has been working in house and experiencing different types of work environments has taught me so much and also showed me how I would like to work and the kind of business that I would like to build for myself.
No, I think that's really supportive to hear. And what that's bringing up for me again is just that when we want to work for ourselves as a freelancer, as a small business owner, whatever it might be, I think that one of our first steps can, or perhaps even should be like assessing the like skills and relationships that we already have. And I do think that if you have had traditional employment, the relationships and skills you built through that are one of your greatest assets moving into independent contractor work or freelance or small business ownership. And if you haven't, it's not like you need that in order to do freelance work.
And I think it's really important to touch on, from my perspective, with your path, you had an offering. So you worked on something that you were interested in and passionate about and had built skill around, and then shared that offering with the world, right? It started with this friend, but this is what I'm doing, this is what I can do, and starting to take on more work, right, in that realm. And so getting clarity on what the offer that you're presenting and having, again, that exchange, that relationship building from that offer is an absolutely great starting place as well.
Because being a freelancer is like a category of how you do work. It doesn't actually mean anything about what you do, right? Like you can't just be a freelancer. The way I've been saying this is like not a real thing. You can be a freelance designer or a freelance audio editor or a freelance copywriter or like a freelance insert your specialty or role here, but you're not just a freelancer. Like the path to becoming a freelancer isn't just being like, I'm a freelancer now and you can hire me to do anything. I mean, I suppose you could do that, but I don't think it would be very successful if you're not specific about what it is that you can do and what you are offering to the world.
Exactly. And I think if we think about the different ways that a freelancer can be more specific about how they're working, what their rates are, what they do or don't do, how they work during a week, I'm hopeful that that would also create an experience where you can still hold the title of freelancer, but have more of those boundaries and operate more as a small business. So the things that you shared, Amelia, that felt more like codified once you started your studio, and as a small business owner, you could still have those and feel empowered to share the ways that you work, even if you're freelancing, or even if you're coming onto a project and not having to just go with the whim of whoever your hirer is. That would be my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just gets back to like the Venn diagram nature of all of this. Like, I really don't think there is and don't need there to be a strict distinction between being a freelancer or a small business owner. But I think it's helpful how we've teased out like what each of them means to us and the relationship we have to those terms. And it really is all about like what we want to build and where we locate our freedom. Because to me, energetic sovereignty is about felt freedom. And we have found that with different language, but very similar types of businesses, I think, at the end of the day. So at a certain point, I suppose it's semantics, but I love digging into that. I'm so nerdy about it. So I'm grateful you did it with me. Something we were just talking about that I want to kind of look at from a different perspective is that you mentioned like having an offering. I talked about the specific way that I sort of delineated what I did as a freelancer or didn't do. And I said something seconds ago. Like, you can't just say you're a freelancer and then be like, I'll do anything for you. That said, I do think one of the benefits of being a freelancer is that you can do a lot of different kinds of things. Like, there is a way in working in this freelance mode that you can embrace like a lot of different aspects of yourself. Like, nobody is really telling freelancers to niche down the way that they're telling other small business owners to quote unquote niche down. So I'm curious, Sarah, from your perspective, what makes freelancing so great for multi-passionate people? And how have you seen that like in your own work or with the people that you work with as freelancers? Like, how are they able to combine many different interests and skills into their freelance career?
This is a great question, and definitely something that inspires me about freelancing as a way to really lead with my life and align my work with my values. Something I mentioned, right, was not my experience when I was working for other companies, really struggling to find a role that I felt was aligned with what I really value. And freelance for me, and the reason why I named this offering Freelance for Life, these courses and workshops and Substack and all those things related to freelancing, Freelance for Life, is because I am so passionate about making life centered decisions and designing from a place of integrating all of my interests. And I'm someone who loves dot connecting in my work and seeing the intersections and the stories. And I think that I believe that the interwoven nature of our interests and passion isn't always celebrated, or we're asked to pull it apart and define it and give ourselves a title. And this has shown up in so many different ways. And I'm thinking actually now of another tension in definition where actually my role before I went independent was UX designer. I held that title at a few different companies. But there's sort of a joke within the design community because we hear UX designer, UI designer, product designer, digital product designer, interactive designer. There's so many different terms and they're used interchangeably. And a lot of times even the designer themselves they don't know what am I? How should I define myself? And so I realized, oh wow, this comes up quite a lot. And then I take a step back and realize, well, it's so hard to define ourselves when we have so many different interests and we are multifaceted. And I think that it's a beautiful opportunity as a freelancer to have that autonomy, the energetic sovereignty to determine what brings you energy, what excites you, where does your intuition guide you? Yeah, what interests do you have? What curiosities do you want to pursue? And with time autonomy, which is one of the biggest gifts, right, of working for yourself is time autonomy, you can curate your work and curate your life. And sure, you're going to have challenges with, needing to bring in work that provides you with enough income, right, to live your life, or making hard decisions between projects, sometimes taking on things you're less excited about. All those challenges come up. But overall, you have such an ability to design and craft and decide for you what works best for you. And that piece for me is, yeah, invaluable.
Yeah, what's coming up for me as I hear you say that is like the way that you can root into your skills instead of a title or a role or like a position that's externally defined. I think when you're working for yourself, when you're self-employed in any way, you can center in like, these are the skills I have and these are the ways I want to work. And you can build offerings around that, or you can only apply or put your name in for contracts that match those things, as opposed to being so like externally labeled as interactive designer, UX designer, whatever it might be, just using your examples there.
And you can also experiment with different things at different times. So, just to give you a little bit more of an example or some background, because of my UX training, I've worked on a lot of mobile apps and websites and often get this kind of work. And so, great, I love doing this kind of work, but I also have other skills from my educational background in graphic design and creative and marketing, where I will start on a project with a client where I'm working on a web experience or a mobile app, and then expand and start to take on, this is more my studio side, start to take on more for them in terms of marketing, graphics, and advertisements, and looking at more of the ecosystem of their design needs, because I have the ability and I really love thinking holistically about design. And now as I'm pursuing a branch, let's say, of my path, I'm really rooting into experience design, this big word, experience design. I actually am in a residency program this year, which has been very exciting and something that I feel like I only really could have done because I have this ability to choose what my work looks like, scale back on some client work. So I have the time and energy to invest in, educational or continuing ed studies, and start to think about other ways that I can expand my practice and my skill set. So I think it's an ever changing and evolving offering of the different things that I do as a small business owner or a freelancer, and it allows me to really lead with passion and interest and sort of multifaceted approach. And I really like that. I feel like it aligns really well to how I approach my work and my creative life.
Hello, my lovely listener. Amelia here, interrupting this amazing conversation, because if you're enjoying this episode, the one you're listening to right now, I think you would really love the Off the Grid Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a paid podcast, newsletter, and asynchronous community space for friends and fans of Off the Grid, hosted on Substack. It's where I share my monthly biz forecasts, bonus episodes about my hot takes, personal feelings, deepest, darkest, brightest, lightest ideas about online business, and more. I also send out a monthly link roundup called The Click Through, where I gather everything that I have been reading, watching, and intrigued by with regards to internet culture, social media happenings, and online business at large. That's also where I have been chronicling the many, many, many announcements I see lately of people taking breaks from social media or exiting platforms entirely. And All of the posts in the Clubhouse have community comment threads where you can ask me questions, share your experiences, and chat with other Off the Grid listeners. It only costs $5 per month or $50 per year to join the fun, and I truly hope that you will head to the show notes and check it out. I look forward to seeing you on Substack, but for now, let's dive back into this conversation. There's like an objection that's coming up from within inside me that I want to voice, and I feel like it's probably coming up for other people if it's coming up for me. Is freelancing as a full-time job only really possible if you're like working in tech? If you can get these like bigger contracts, if there are like big companies who will hire you and pay you big amounts of money, like there's something in me that's like, is this only possible if I can like find a bigger corporation or startup that has a healthy budget and will give me some of it? Or like, is it possible for anyone? Does that question make sense? I think it's coming from a place of like fear and scarcity in myself. I can feel that. But I kind of want to give you a chance to be like, no, Amelia, here's how it actually is. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, it's really funny because as you're asking the question, I'm also having like a somatic response and cringing a little bit because I don't want those types of opportunities. Like I have worked as a contractor for big tech and I have gotten some interesting projects on a project basis, right? Short term, I'm not embedding. You might hear the term staff augmentation. That's not how I work. That's sort of when you are almost working as a full-time employee, but they're just paying you as an independent contractor. You're not getting any benefits, but you might work long term. Like I'm a contractor at this, big tech for a year. That's just not the kind of projects that I take on. But yeah, I don't like working in that way. And I think this almost goes back to our original question around a freelancer versus small business owner. I love cultivating the relationships. I love taking on clients and supporting them, right, as myself or as a small studio when I need a small team. And having new opportunities to connect with people and learn about other people's interests and excitement. I've helped some really small mom and pop shops, some folks who are bootstrapping their ideas and their dreams and helping them bring those to life. And yes, those projects might be much smaller budgets. They might be shorter term, and you might have a little bit of a challenge of the turnover of needing to find new work. But for me, I enjoy this process. It aligns with how I want to work, at least for now. It might not be forever. So while I, of course, have much more experience in designing for the tech world, more so than, freelance writers and what they experience, right? Or other types of freelance design. But my hope is that it is possible. We just might have to be creative about who we're working with, how we're working with them. Our offerings might need to shift or scale. And to be honest, Amelia, I'm experiencing this right now. I mean, I've been independent for 9 years, and this year, 2025, has been the hardest year that I've had. COVID, I was not severely impacted, but this year it has been much slower, much more challenging to find projects in general, let alone, right, like long-term or well-paying projects. And I think we're all experiencing, as you mentioned in the very beginning of our chat, challenges in how we're going to move forward from here.
Thank you so much for that honesty and perspective. I think it was really helpful to hear both that no, freelancing is not just for tech. I just needed you to say it to me. And also I appreciate that you just brought in like freelance writers, which I think is another industry where freelancing is incredibly common. Like staff writing positions are few and far between. And so many of our favorite writers out there are freelancing and publishing essays and long form reported pieces. I also thought it was really helpful and important that you brought in that sort of like embedding in a company as a freelancer, the quote unquote staff augmentation. I think that it's always really important as an independent contractor to know your rights as a worker, to understand when a company may be overstepping and treating you as an employee without providing any of the benefits of employment. And unfortunately, as the worker, in the US, at least, you're kind of put in a position where like you have to be your own watchdog for that. Companies can put up job descriptions that say independent contractor, but are absolutely employee type roles. And so I think it's just important to bring that into a conversation where we're talking a lot about like the freedom of freelancing and the autonomy and flexibility we've found within independent contractor work. Like, there are plenty of businesses out there who are taking advantage of independent contractors, and that is not what we are uplifting today. Like, if you are working as an employee, we want you to get the benefits that you are deserved by your typically state government. It varies from state to state, but also federal government. The IRS has rules around this as well. Those are just two things I wanted to name of like pulling in our creative community through freelance writers, recognizing the like limitations of the status of independent contractor and being aware of that as a worker. And then also, I just wanted to touch on what you shared at the end of like, it is a really challenging year. I think that, I mentioned like, is this possible in tech where they have like the big budgets? I mean, even the places that have had bigger budgets are all scaling back. And I've been thinking a lot recently about the conversation I had with Jenny Blake about a year ago around like her business kind of collapsing during the pandemic and what that has taken and if it's coming back, and with everything that's happening in the world right now, and particularly that Trump is doing around tariffs and trade and everything else, we're going to start to feel that recession at this point. So now I just feel stressed again, but
Well, this is like a great area to dive into around sustainability and how we can think about crafting a sustainable business or a sustainable freelance practice throughout the ups and downs, right? In these times. And I feel like, one of the terms that you hear so much and it is a fear around freelance, is feast or famine. And I'm really trying to move away from using that terminology. I think even ebb and flow feels a lot better for me because, of course, it's like it's life. There's going to be up, there's going to be down, there's going to be shifts. And the thing that has actually been so supportive for me, I really nerded out over the past year or two on learning about rituals, designing for rituals, and like connecting to seasonality and what nature can teach us, and really just using that as a grounding practice for myself to recognize like, oh yes, like seasons, they change, they shift. We go through cycles, and that always feels for me like it can help me maintain a mindset that I can get through different periods of shifting. I don't know what will happen. I don't have the answers, but I'm much more in a mindset of creating the systems to support during those times and how we can support one another. So, yeah, I think that, we're all sort of moving through the unknown together. And I'm curious how you think about sustainability, Amelia, with your business and when times are slow. I know you've been really wonderful and transparent with the Clubhouse group of sharing behind the scenes on finances, right? And when we have some of that ebb.
yeah. Part of what I want to do through this show, and the reason I talk about my finances very transparently in the Clubhouse, is to refute and refuse this idea that a business must always be growing, that things must always be up and to the right, as they say. I think that that is not how life works. That is not how creativity works. That is not how anything works. And capitalism is a sort of like forces that imperative in a way that I just think is quite literally unnatural. And so I am unwilling to live by it and unable to live by it. I'm actually incapable of that. It's not how my body works. And so it can't be how my business works. And so I am always trying to normalize a more seasonal or cyclical approach to business, while at the same time noticing that I do have some like consistent financial needs and needs for resources in my life that I have to be figuring out how to meet those needs, right? So it's like part of what I'm really thinking through this year, and something I've been working on and will probably record a Clubhouse episode on soon, is sort of modulating expectations, whether that be for my budget, my workload, my client load. I've been thinking a lot about how do I have a sort of like what I used to refer to as a sort of necessary, nice, and ideal version of how much money I make, how many tasks I can do each day, how many clients I have at any given time, and just sort of knowing like, okay, maybe we are going a little bit back to like only the necessities right now, and that's okay. The other piece I've really been trying to hold on to it's frankly quite hard for me, but I'm really working on it, is just to notice like if business is slow, I have more time for all of the other things I'm always saying I want to be doing. And while it is very easy to just fill all that time with stressing about business being slow, I could, in fact, do something else, right? And if I can really trust that there will be these different seasons, that maybe now is a more fallow period, but there will be another really busy work period. Like this time is actually the gift to put my attention elsewhere to some degree. And I try to stay centered in that from like a personal spiritual perspective. I don't say that to normalize like the complete exploitation extraction of our economy. And like, I'm not trying to say to anybody that if whatever Trump is doing has totally wrecked your business, like I'm not doing a toxic positivity thing here of like, be happy about it because now you have time to read books. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But for me, there's a big difference in income between how much money my business made last year and how much it's made this year. But if I'm really honest with myself, that's all fine. Like I still have enough. And so if I do have enough, I'm trying to see this as an opportunity to let my energy go other places and to remember that when I do that, it also always produces these like cool and interesting yields that can feed back into the business as well.
Absolutely. I love that you bring this up, Amelia. I feel like it's so meaty. There's so many things to talk about here. It's hard to unlearn, right? The ways that we have been trained to think about and react to growth, as you said, and scaling and money and enoughness. And it takes time. And so I also don't want to say to our listeners, just don't be afraid, like, and don't worry, and just use the time to do all these other fun, creative, passions that you have, because the fear is real and the challenges are very real. But I do think that from my experience of going through the cycles, I've come to develop, a relationship with the changes. And I still have the worries that start to creep up. My body still feels some of the tension. I'm like, ooh, things are a little slow. I need to work on some business development. Oh, I need to get a new project. Oh, what if I don't get something? It's been kind of not exactly my ideal. But as you mentioned, the support systems that I do have, a little bit of emergency fund, some padding there, some ideas for longer term, long tail potential opportunities that might come my way with time. And then putting that energy into the things, as you mentioned, that I'm excited about or that I want to grow, that I want to plant, and seeing that as valuable. And I think giving that the time and space to also be valuable. And sometimes that's also rest, which we definitely did not learn that the rest was okay, right? Rest is okay. And sometimes maybe it's that you're slow and so you're just going to rest. Or maybe it's that you're slow and you're going to read a lot of books that have been stacked up, right, on your side stand, or that you're going to talk with new people or learn a new skill. But yes, seeing that again, it's a balance, seeing that as a gift, but also acknowledging, as you said, the real environment and realities that we live within.
Yeah, I think that it's that work that we all have to do to understand, like, in any given moment, like, is this real scarcity or does it just feel scarce because of any given reason? Am I like trauma, the world, what I'm used to, and I'm fear? Like, there are so many reasons that can happen to us. And I think that as we try to root out a sort of scarcity mindset from ourselves, that doesn't have to be in conflict with recognizing that there's very real scarcity in the world. Like those aren't opposing things. They're both true. And we can hold both of them simultaneously, which I feel like is what we're trying to do here together. And this is reminding me of really one of the primary principles of like both business ownership and permaculture, which is that we need diversity, right? Like biodiversity is at the root of the abundance on our planet. And I also think it's at the root of abundance in any business. And so this can really come up for freelancers specifically because sometimes there is a way of freelancing where you're always on one contract, and those can be extended contracts. And that does build a lot of precarity into your business if all of your income or revenue is reliant on one singular source. And I think that this can be a great period to really like look at your business and say like, okay, do I have a few different things going on? And what I've always noticed is that if one area is really down, maybe I can tap another. And this is something I've talked about in the clubhouse. Like this year, Softer Sounds is making significantly less money than it has in the past. I'm making money on the levels of like my first 6 months of business, which were very low. And that's on the Softer Sound side, but Off the Grid is making so much more money that my like overall ecosystem is still well resourced and funded. And I'm really grateful for that right now, because if Softer Sounds was my only thing, I would be very stressed and I would be in a space of real scarcity. But I'm not, because I have cultivated a few different areas of my business and they're able to ebb and flow both together and differently. Like they work together and they have their own rhythms, is what I'm learning. And I think that that's a really great lesson, whether you are like growing a garden or growing a business, is how do we build in that diversity? Is that something you've seen in your freelance practice or your business or others recently?
It is. And I love how you're talking about this because I think what I react negatively towards, or I have felt this sense lately of not really feeling good about folks talking about diversified income streams. And I feel like part of that is because it, again, centers on more ways to make money up and to the right and having passive income. That was such a buzzword. Passive income, you're not doing anything and just money is flowing your way. And I do consider my work pretty diversified, getting back to our prismatic thinking or multifaceted thinking. I have my client work, which takes different shapes and forms, as I mentioned, the types of design offerings that I provide, or even small project versus large project. And then I teach and I have, just different things that I'm doing, but they're not always moving at the same rate. And that's this beautiful ecosystem gardening metaphor that you're sharing of and the cycles. And sometimes things step forward and other things step back. Sometimes, right, we can move our focus and work in a different way. I think it's still something that I'm obviously exploring. Like I said, I don't know exactly where all the paths will lead to, but I think that what feels most supportive to me, not just in work, but in life these days, is trying to think much more like having an ecosystem for life and business and having that be the teacher in how we relate to our world.
Yes, I obviously agree so much. And I appreciate that you pointed out too the way that like how we're talking about this through an ecosystem approach, even though I am using words like diversity and biodiversity. I don't mean, and we don't mean what other people mean when they say diversifying your income streams. And what was coming up for me there is just, I really think that those people are just teaching more for the sake of more. And I'm trying to do something that's more like enough for the sake of abundance or something like that. It's like I learned pretty early that I cannot just extract more and more and more for myself. Like if you are just diversifying your income streams forever, like the soil that your business is planted on, like will lose all its nutrients and will not yield any more growth. Like that will happen. That will happen if you are monocropping your business and just offering one thing. And that will happen if you are planting all the time and you're never allowing the space for the renutriation. That's not a real word, but for the soil to gather more nutrients and repair and recover. And, this isn't just metaphorical to me. Like the way I learned that lesson, similar to what you've shared, Sarah, is like through my body. Like I worked myself into chronic migraines and it brought me to a halt. And it was really this sort of like, when you have a migraine, you cannot work on your computer. It was not physically possible for me. My vision would blur. I was in so much pain. There was no amount of pushing through that I could keep doing. And it became this like hard no that my body was giving me that was teaching me that the way I was working and the amount I was asking myself to do was untenable, unsustainable, impossible for me. And so when I'm thinking about building a business ecosystem, it's not about, as you've said, like diversifying the income streams, quote unquote. It's about letting myself work in these many ways that I'm interested in, allowing what is kind of already planted underneath the soil to emerge, whether that be, my book podcast, that's like my fun personal project right now, or it be like Off the Grid, which started as a sort of like lark of an idea, or a course that I develop and sell through Softer Sounds. Like all of those are things that are always sort of like under the surface for me. And just remembering that like, because Softer Sounds didn't yield so many like tomatoes / editing clients this year, Like maybe there's a ton of marigolds in my garden and that's great. And I can like plant more of those seeds or something. My gardening metaphor is failing me a little bit here, or it's reached the limits of my gardening knowledge. But I do just really appreciate that we've been able to really think through like, how do we make our businesses sustainable for us as well as responsive to the world around us as we're all like reckoning with an incredibly different environment, like day-to-day environment in which we're doing business. Like the world feels so different than it did a year ago, right? And we're all having to reckon with that. But we can root into those cycles and the skills that we have learned to sustain ourselves and each other, which I really appreciate. Okay, I have one kind of final question for you, which is if someone is listening to this and they're like, okay, Sarah and Amelia, you have convinced me that perhaps I would like to do some freelance work. This might be a path for me either to leave my job or make some money alongside my job or bridge from my job to a business or become a business that I'm starting. If somebody's thinking that, what advice do you have for them to help land their first freelance gig? What are their next steps? Where do they go to figure this out? What wisdom can you share with us?
Well, some of this will not be a surprise to y'all, but starting with your mindset, being experimental in your mindset, because as you just spelled out for everyone, Amelia, yes, maybe it's taking on one project, moonlighting, right? Doing something after hours when you're fully employed. And maybe it's taking a plunge and seeing how things go, right? Maybe it's working on one offering totally different from the things that you do in your day-to-day life or job. So having an experimental mindset, I think, is really helpful and initiates the flexibility that you need, right? When you're kind of pursuing the unknown path. And then, of course, beginning with your relationships, beginning with your community. That could look like your innermost circle, friends and family who know you best, who would vouch for you, right? Who support you. And then folks who you've worked with in the past, right? Or have had great interactions with, or people that are part of your communities. And it could be an exchange of services. It could be an offering specifically curated for those folks, or just getting the word out to people who will support you. One of the beautiful things I feel about freelancing and just small business ownership is that, we see it actually right within Off the Grid, within the clubhouse. We want to be in community with one another. And so helping each other get through our challenges and celebrating our wins, that's really important. So I think starting with, what do you want to offer? What is the service? Starting small. There's lots of different things that you might feel passionate about exploring, and tapping your community first. Of course, there are places you can look for gigs. I actually have a lot of free resources on the Freelance for Life website, one of which is where to find work, looking for gig opportunities. And there are just gig economy websites all over the place. And I have a curated list of those. But what I recommend is it's helpful to get a quick survey of what is currently being looked for in the market, kind of response to who's hiring. But it's much harder, as we all know, to kind of land opportunities that are cold outreach or applying amidst so many other people. So I kind of use that only as a backup and more for research, and then really going with the people that you know or that you want to know, relationships that you want to form as a starting point for getting your first gig.
Oh, that's so helpful. And just to recap for listeners, so starting with your skills, what are the skills you have? Then going to your network, trying to share those skills with them. I think that could take the form of sending an email, take the form of scheduling a coffee chat and catch up and letting people know what you are available for hire for. And then also utilizing job boards for research purposes to see like, what are the roles that are out there? What are people hiring for? What are maybe the types of projects that I could do that never occurred to me somebody might be hiring for? I think that that's always super helpful. And then I think the other step is just like actually putting yourself up for things, whether it be from job boards or through the relationships, and having some type of portfolio, web page, some asset that is able to share your experience with people. Because as a studio owner at the podcast studio, I do get quite a few inquiries from people who are interested in work. And what I notice is that many of them have never gathered their work experience, and I have no in to know what they can do or what they're really available for. So I just wanted to plug that as something I have been on the receiving end of, which is a request for work that comes with no context. So being able to create that context for yourself. And I also just want to co-sign everything you said, because that's exactly how I ended up being a freelancer, right? It started with the relationships. Then I definitely use some of the podcast job boards, which those are more in the form of listservs. There's one called Ladio. There's a New York Public Radio one that people would put up jobs on in the podcast space. And I would look at those and apply or reach out about opportunities. And the other thing that I will also just add in, maybe as my final words, is that just an encouragement to everyone that you have more skills than you know. You are more hireable than you may believe. You can do these things and can have more confidence than perhaps you can muster from within yourself. But you can put yourself up for work that maybe seems intimidating or scary or bigger than you may have imagined. And you are very likely already qualified for it, something obviously we see time and time again. And I think that also just permission to be strategic and permission to sort of take the path I did, which is podcast editing was not my one true love and passion. It was the skill I had that I could charge the most for. And that's why I started freelancing for it. And so if you are hiding a hidden skill in your back pocket that you're oh, I used to get paid so much money to do this and I don't really want to build a business out of it, but I could make some money doing it, full permission to just do that as a freelancer and figure out the rest of what you quote unquote really want to be doing along the way. We can mix and match all these paths. And I hope today's episode encouraged all of us to do more of that. Sarah, do you have any final words for Off the Grid folks before we sign off today?
I think I'd just like to share that if folks are interested in pursuing a path that feels right for them, that I hope that they feel the courage and the possibility of doing so. And I'm always here. I love talking freelance and small business and all the things about doing things differently. So if folks want to reach out and chat, I'm always open to virtual tea times and community connections.
Beautiful. And what is the best way for them to reach you or find you online?
Yes. So you can find me if you're interested in the multiple facets of my work. You can find me at my studio, which is huzzahstudio.com, and I have Huzzah Studio News. You can find me also at Freelance for Life, where there are free lessons and templates and my Substack. And I do have also a paid course and workshops, and I'd like to offer this community discount code. So if you have interest in taking something in the future, I teach a few times a year, you can use the code Off the Grid for 20% off of any of those offerings.
Oh, that's so generous of you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for all of the freelance wisdom you've shared today, for joining me in this rather philosophical conversation we got into, but also very practical advice that you gave all of us. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in and for joining us in this. Until next time, we will see you off the grid and on the job board. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go